I can't do this anymore. Please divorce me. I was pressing my head against the cold floor. It's been 15 years since my son was born and I started working at my in-laws' factory. Being family, I wasn't paid a salary and was treated like a housewife. My father-in-law Gail, who never wavered from his methods, and my mother-in-law Hildred, who constantly interfered with employee matters. And my husband Rian, who never stopped them and always sided with his parents. When I came home, he wouldn't help with child care or housework. Since being confined to the in-laws' separate house, I wasn't allowed to return to my parents' home. But if it was just that, I could have endured it, just for me. What I couldn't forgive was sacrificing my son. Rian decided that our son, who was about to graduate high school, should work at the factory without even asking for his opinion. Rian's reasoning was that, like himself, it would be best for our son to start working at the factory early as the heir. But our son didn't want that. Not only was he exploiting me, but he was also trying to exploit our son's life. When I realized that, my patience reached its limit. With determination, I asked Rian for a divorce, and he looked down at me coldly while sipping hot coffee. Divorce, huh? I can do that, but you'll keep working here. My name is Megan. I'm 45 years old this year. Due to my father being an engineer, I was fond of tinkering with machines from a young age and went on to study electronic engineering at a vocational school. It was at a business meeting with a client after I started working that I met my husband, Rian. Our company was discussing placing an order with a small factory run by Rian's father, and during those meetings, I frequently visited the factory, leading to a rapport with Rian. He confessed to me, and we started dating with marriage in mind. Back then, it was still a very male-dominated society. Being a female technician from a client company, I didn't expect to leave a good impression, but contrary to my expectations, his parents approved of our relationship with smiles. I remember being immensely relieved when his parents accepted me, even though I had pride in the top-notch skills I had acquired by working as a temp at various companies. I was inexperienced in relationships. It was when I found out I was pregnant. A few months after we registered our marriage, my period didn't come, and a visit to the hospital confirmed I was pregnant. When I told Rian, his reaction was to spit out the coffee he was drinking and jump with joy as if it were a festival. Prompted by my pregnancy, I resigned from the company I had been working for, agreeing without any doubts to Rian's suggestion that I work at his family's factory after the baby was born. Now, it's probably not necessary to accept quitting your job, but back then, it was still not uncommon to leave your job and join your husband's family after marriage. Moreover, I genuinely wanted to support the family as part of my in-laws. We quickly cleared out the separate house at his parents' place, and the three of us, including our unborn son, began living together. But after giving birth to my son, I finally realized something. Rian didn't help with any of the housework. Even as a stay-at-home mom, handling all the housework with a baby was more challenging than I imagined. When our son cried, he wouldn't soothe him, and while I was changing diapers, "When's dinner? When's the bath ready?" he would just complain. Even when I pleaded for help, he rejected and said, "Housework and child-rearing are women's work," and started yelling. "You don't work, so you should do that at least." I sometimes asked Hildred and others for help when they came by to check on us, but my in-laws only doted on their son, never actually changing diapers or soothing the baby. Moreover, the savings I had accumulated before marriage. My son's wife's savings belonged to our family. Gail took it all. My son's wife's savings belonged to our family. Gail took it all. Living in a household dominated by Gail, there was no way I could ask for my money back. Although the in-laws covered the rent, utilities, and groceries, I had no money of my own, and I had to beg Rian for allowance even to buy a single piece of clothing for our child. Gradually, I lost even the will to defy them. Rian, who should have been my ally, either coldly brushed me off, saying it was a wife's duty, or lashed out at me harshly when he was in a bad mood. With a newborn son to care for, I had no means of escape and had to accept this situation. As soon as our son Tex was able to attend daycare, giving me some time to myself, my in-laws and Rian instructed me to work for the family business without pay. I once pleaded for a salary, even a small amount, so I could at least buy new clothes for our child, but Rian and his parents firmly refused, citing that the household expenses were covered by the in-laws. They handed down stained hand-me-downs from relatives, insisting that those were sufficient for the child. How many times did I hug my son, apologizing for not being able to buy him new clothes? Tex became my only source of joy. My in-laws and Rian did not help with childcare, and I had no way to contact my own family or afford transportation to seek their help. So I worked tirelessly, with blood, sweat, and tears, solely focused on protecting and raising Tex well, despite this hellish family. One spring, when Tex was 15, Rian and his parents suddenly announced they were going to renovate the house. They refused to pay me for my work as a family member, yet they had money for a remodel? Thinking about all the better clothes and food I could have provided Tex with that money, I asked, "Why the sudden renovation?" And Rain snorted. "Tex is 15 now, and he can start working next year, right? We need to groom him as our successor." Without even considering Tex's wishes, Rian implied that he wouldn't be going to college, making my face go pale. I could endure it if it was just me. But to think this man would also ruin Tex's life? Without thinking, I told him I wanted a divorce. "I can't do this anymore. Please divorce me." Rian looked down at me for a long moment, then sighed dramatically. "Divorce, huh?" After sipping his coffee and pondering for a moment, Rian said something outrageous. "I can divorce you, but you have to keep working here. No one else will hire you anyway, right?" It felt like my world was tilting. What was this man saying? Even after divorcing me, he expected me to work in his factory? I stared at Rian in shock as he smirked at me. "No way. I can definitely find work elsewhere." Fortunately, our factory still had business ties with my previous workplace, and I had connections with colleagues who had been promoted there. Even if it wasn't the same company, with my skills, I could surely get a job through those contacts. "Fine, but leave Tex behind. He's our heir." When I resolutely refused, perhaps intimidated by my determination, Rian reluctantly backed down. But then he began insisting that I leave Tex behind. I wanted to shout at him for saying such a ridiculous thing, but if Tex said he wanted to stay, leaving the in-laws' house might make his life more difficult than it is now. Unlike me, if raised as the heir, Tex might live a life without any inconvenience. That thought crossed my mind. Biting my lip, Rian led Tex and me to the living room of the in-laws' house. Sensing our tense atmosphere, Tex silently followed. "What's going on, Rian, at this hour?" Gail greeted our family with a suspicious look. "She wants to divorce me," Rian announced as if it were a joke, and I heard Tex gasp behind us. Gail looked us over, scratching his potbelly, then led us into the living room without a word. Hildred must have overheard, glaring at me as she silently made tea. I couldn't remember when it started, but nothing was ever placed before me anymore. I usually made my own tea without a word, but today I couldn't bring myself to do it. "So, why did Megan suddenly decide she wants a divorce?" Gail asked Rian while sipping his hot tea. Gail had started calling me by my first name without any honorifics at some point. The first time, I thought I had misheard, but it was not a mistake. Neither Hildred nor Rian reprimanded him for it. Ah, this was the norm in this house, I reminded myself countless times. Gale's sticky gaze made me want to look down, but today I resisted and looked straight back. As soon as I mentioned the renovation, she said it. She must really hate living with us. Rian spat out, and my in-laws shot sharp, needle-like glares at me. I had expected it, but I never got used to it. The initial welcoming mood vanished as soon as I started working in the family factory. The first time I voiced my opinion about the production line, Gale erupted, insisting his way was best. But I persisted, determined to make good products, which must have infuriated him. "Don't butt in, woman." He dismissed my opinions, and for a while, Gale's harassment continued. Come to think of it, it may have been around that time. Maybe it was from then that I started being treated disdainfully by my in-laws. Though retired now, Gale occasionally came to the factory, claiming to oversee things. He checked to see if his methods were still in place. The employees worked in constant fear of becoming his next target. Hildred, too, interfered with the factory despite knowing nothing about it. Her interference was particularly bad when it came to personnel. Lower his pay, I didn't like his greeting today, or give her a bonus, she brought a treat the other day. She whimsically changed employees' treatment based on her mood. Even after Rian became president, this didn't change, and Rian unquestioningly implemented his parents' decisions. For Rian, if his parents said black, it was black, no matter how white it was. I had to apologize every day to keep the employees from quitting. But my in-laws and Rian didn't even like that. Please, let me divorce him. I didn't give a reason, but I asked again. My hands on the floor trembled, wondering what harsh words would be thrown at me. However, contrary to my expectations, Gale accepted it easily. If you insist, then it can't be helped. Sometimes things just don't work out. When I raised my face in surprise, she had a nasty smile just like Rian's. A chill ran down my spine. Divorce if you want. But I won't allow you to quit the factory. You'll continue to work for free as compensation for the divorce settlement. What was he saying? Compensation for the divorce settlement? What compensation? What have I done to deserve such exploitation from them? While I was trembling, Hildred gently asked Tex. Tex, you'll stay with us, right? If you leave with Megan, you'll just end up poor. At those words, I hurriedly looked at Tex. For me, this place was a bed of nails, but for Tex, it wasn't necessarily a bad environment. He probably didn't know that Rian intended to make him work immediately after high school. Maybe Tex would say he wanted to stay here. When Tex, who had been silent, finally spoke, I was so scared that I closed my eyes. I'm going with Megan. There was no hesitation in his clear words, and I looked up at Tex. He gently smiled at my probably pathetic face, then turned a stern gaze towards his grandparents and Rian. Tex, you're our heir. I won't allow you to leave. Rian immediately shouted in anger. Tex, what are you saying? Think it over. Tex, who do you think raised you? Hildred, obviously shocked by Tex's decision, tried to persuade him, and Gale turned even redder than Rian, spitting as she spoke. But Tex shielded me and answered clearly once more. The one who raised me was Megan. I've never once considered Rian, Grandpa, or Grandma, who bullied Megan and barely took care of me, as family. When did my son's back become so strong? The son I thought I had to protect was now protecting me. Though I felt pathetic, I was incredibly happy. Later, I heard from the mediator at family court that Rian and his parents, panicked at the thought of losing their heir to me, consulted with a lawyer they knew. But unlike in the old days, the child's opinion takes precedence in the end. Especially when a 15-year-old, almost an adult, clearly chooses his mother, it's hard to overturn that decision. Reluctantly, Rian gave up on getting custody of his son and agreed to the division of property, but when I requested payment for the work I had done for the family business, "You weren't an employee, you helped out on your own, so there's no payment." He stubbornly refused until the end. Returning to the present, after finishing the discussion with the in-laws, the next day, I packed my few belongings with my son and moved back to my parents' house, where I hadn't been able to return for years. My parents were surprised to see their daughter and the grandson they hadn't seen since he was little, but they welcomed us warmly without saying a word. "I'm sorry I couldn't come back all this time." "What are you talking about?" "If anything, I'm sorry I didn't notice." When I tearfully explained the situation and apologized, my mother, Mackenzie, cried even more than I did and hugged Tex and me tightly. That night's dinner was overflowing with Mackenzie's handmade dishes, and it was the first peaceful time I had in a long while. The next day, the phone in the living room at my parents' house rang loudly. It was Rian calling. I was about to hang up immediately, but I heard a panicked voice say something about employees, so I listened carefully, wondering what had happened. "What's wrong? Was there an accident?" The first thing that came to mind was an accident involving one of the employees. Had someone gotten caught in a machine? Or maybe something happened on the way to work. "Just come back, we'll talk after that," Rian said, so I quickly headed to the in-laws' factory without further delay. The factory, usually noisy with the sound of machines, was eerily quiet today. As I stood there puzzled, Rian and my in-laws rushed over. "You're late. What were you doing?" Ignoring Gail's first complaint, I asked again. "More importantly, what happened? Was there an accident? Did someone get hurt?" "No, all the employees have quit." What reached my ears was an unexpected statement. "Quit? All of them?" I repeated in shock. There hadn't been any sign of this yesterday. Well, maybe one or two were fed up with Gail's unreasonable demands. Or maybe Hildred had been complaining again. While there were some possible reasons, it shouldn't have led to everyone quitting suddenly. As I stood confused, Rian spoke angrily. "It's because you left. As soon as they heard you were quitting because of the divorce, they all decided to leave." Rian stomped his feet and yelled, but I felt like I was watching from afar. Even after retiring, Gail kept interfering with management and work details, and whenever Hildred saw an employee she didn't like, she would tell Rian to reduce their pay. Rian would always take their complaints seriously and reflect them in the management. The employees' dissatisfaction had been growing year by year due to their outrageous attitudes. For the past 15 years, I had managed to mediate between them and the employees, preventing their anger from exploding. Although it was only within my reach, whenever Gail targeted an employee, I would defend them even if I got yelled at, and when Hildred raised her eyebrows, I would forcibly divert her attention. I tried to guide Rian, who was willing to ruin the workplace by following his parents' orders, to minimize the damage as much as possible. It seemed that the employees had noticed my efforts. I unexpectedly realized they had come to care for me. Even through those tough days, I managed to get through because of my son Tex and the smiles of those employees. "They said there's no reason to work here if Megan isn't around. Who do they think is paying their salaries?" Rian's frustrated voice made me burst out laughing. I wonder who said that. Faces of the employees came to mind one after another. Hearing my laughter, my in-laws glared at me with expressions like demons. Rian quickly commanded, "Listen. Here are their phone numbers. Call them and convince them to come back." He shoved a phone book at me, speaking as if I would obediently follow his orders, which made me laugh even harder. "Haha. Why would I do that? I'm no longer your wife or an employee. Besides, I haven't even been paid properly. I wiped the tears from my eyes. What were these tears for? Perhaps a final farewell to the Rian who was once kind. Listen, you didn't pay me because I'm family, you didn't help with housework or childcare, and you treated me like a housewife. I have no reason to listen to you, and I have no intention of coming back. And I have absolutely no intention of persuading the employees. After a good laugh, I lower my voice and speak quietly. Rian and his parents are silent, seemingly not expecting me to argue back so firmly. For these past 15 years, I endured everything for my son. No matter how mean they were to me, no matter how much they ignored my dignity, I put up with it for my son's sake. They probably saw me as a quiet wife, one who couldn't stand up to them. Seeing me resolute, they all look like fish out of water, mouths gaping. I've made up my mind. I'm going to demand the unpaid salary. If the employees have quit, then there would be no harm in me making my claim. I thought it would be enough to just leave, but if they're the only ones who suffer, it's a different story. After stating this firmly, I ignore Rian's shock and turn on my heel. I hear their voices trying to stop me, but I run away with all my might. As soon as I get home, I ask my father to contact his lawyer friend, and after explaining the situation, I decide to file a lawsuit for the unpaid salary. The diary I had been diligently keeping proved useful, recording the days I worked and the words I received from Rian and his parents, which served as strong evidence. Additionally, one of the employees had recorded a conversation when I was being harassed by them. He had gone out of his way to bring it to my family's house, thinking it would be useful for the divorce. Thanks to this, I was in a very advantageous position, and excluding the parts that had expired due to the statute of limitations, I was able to claim a portion of the amount that should have been paid in compensation for the years of suffering. Rian and his parents stormed into my parents' house, but they left quietly when my father called the police. A few days later, the amount I had won was deposited into the designated account. The factory owned by Rian's family, which lost its employees all at once, couldn't be operated by just Gail and Rian, and it soon had to close down. They seemed to have lost all their savings by paying my alimony, compensation for damages, and the severance pay for the employees who left. They sold their house and land, and now the three of them live in a small apartment. Because of the penalty fees to the companies they had contracts with, both Rian and his parents, who were co-signers, had to pay, so even though they are old, they are working part-time jobs. They have to earn money, so they are doing physically demanding work. As for Rian, he started job hunting, but having only worked at his family's factory, he didn't have any common sense about the real world. Spoiled as the future president since childhood, Rian couldn't handle being reprimanded by a younger boss soon after starting a new job. Since then, he hasn't been able to hold down a decent job and is living off his parents, as the lawyer who visited his family's house told me. I stayed at my parents' house with my son Tex for a while, but thanks to old connections from my previous job, I found a new job and started living in an apartment near the company with my son. My parents said I could commute from their house, but I couldn't keep relying on them, given their age, so I decided with my son to move out. Of course, unlike before, I visit them whenever I have free time to make up for the 15 years we couldn't see each other. Then, surprisingly, I reunited with a former employee who had recorded the harassment from Rian's family at my new job. When I saw his back and called out to him, he looked surprised and relieved that we were both okay, and we laughed together. He had helped me a lot at Rian's family's factory, and it didn't take long before he proposed to me. Tex, who quickly sensed my change, pressed me about it, and when I confessed, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he got mad at me instead. Tex seemed to remember him well and quickly grew attached to him. Even though Rian's family was terrible, Tex must have had feelings about his biological father and grandparents. However, those feelings quickly disappeared as I watched Tex and the new Rian happily building models together. "Hey, you two, dinner's ready," I called out while serving freshly cooked white rice. My work and family life are so happy that it's almost scary. The tough days we went through feel like they happened just for the sake of today's happiness, and the days when the three of us will laugh about it are not far away.